Every single day, there's this massive, almost invisible network of ships that carries our entire world across the oceans. They're basically the arteries of global trade, and for more than 100 years, they've relied on a couple of incredible shortcuts. But what happens when those vital arteries start to clog up? Well, that's what we're looking at today, how these titans of trade are starting to falter, and the incredible high-stakes race to build their replacements.
So let's just dive right into the main question, right? What really happens when the world's most vital shortcuts just fail? And look, this isn't some far-off hypothetical. It's a question that economists, generals, and world leaders are wrestling with right now. Why? Because the answer could literally reshape the entire map of global power.
Okay, at the very heart of this story is a concept called a geo-economic choke point. Now, it sounds super complicated, I know, but it's actually pretty simple. Just think of it as a massive bottleneck for global shipping. It's a place where a huge amount of trade is forced through one tiny passage, which makes it both incredibly efficient and, as you can imagine, incredibly vulnerable. To really get why these choke points are such a big deal today, we have to go back in time and look at the two giants that basically defined the last century and a half of trade, the Suez and the Panama Canals. And these things weren't just canals, they were absolute engineering marvels that literally shrank the world. This timeline really tells the story of how transformative these projects were. First up, in 1869, the Suez Canal opens, a direct, sea-level shot between two seas. Then you have the French, who, feeling pretty good about that success, decide to tackle Panama in 1881. And they fail. I mean, spectacularly. It actually took the full might of the United States until 1914 to finally conquer the jungle and the mountains and get it done.
So what was the payoff for all that blood, sweat, and treasure? Well, just look at this number. The Suez Canal saves a ship going from the Arabian Sea to London, a journey of almost 9,000 kilometers. That's not just a small savings. That's the difference between profit and loss, between fresh food and spoiled cargo. It changed absolutely everything.
And hey, if Suez was a game changer, then Panama was a full-blown revolution. Think about it. A brutal, 2-week, 20,000-kilometer slog around the dangerous tip of South America was suddenly reduced to an 8-hour trip. It didn't just shorten a route, it basically fused the world's two biggest oceans into a single, global highway.
But we gotta be honest here. This progress wasn't just about making money on shipping. This quote really gets to the heart of the darker side of it all. These projects were instruments of pure imperial ambition. They were designed to project naval power and control the flow of global trade. It really shows you that from day one, these canals were as much about military strategy as they were about economics. Okay, so let's fast forward to today, because those 20th century titans, well, they're facing some very 21st century problems. The very foundations of global trade are starting to show some pretty serious cracks. And what's wild is that the threats facing each canal are completely different. For Panama, the problem is literally Mother Nature. Climate change and drought are starving its massive lock system of the fresh water it desperately needs to work. But for Suez, the threat is human. It's so narrow that a political conflict or even just one single accident can shut the whole thing down in an instant. To really wrap your head around Panama's problem, you just need this one staggering number: 200 million liters. That's how much fresh water gets dumped from a critical drinking water lake into the ocean every single time one ship passes through. So when it doesn't rain enough to fill that lake back up, the entire system just grinds to a halt. And Suez's vulnerability? Yeah, that's nothing new. I mean, just look at this photo from the Suez Crisis back in 1956. Egypt literally sank ships to block the canal, showing just how easily one political move can sever this critical artery. For weeks, nothing got through, sending absolute shockwaves through the global economy.
So, if the old giants are starting to fail, what's next? Well, this brings us to a brand new, incredibly high-stakes global race to engineer the next generation of choke points and bypass the old guard completely.
It sounds like a pretty simple question, doesn't it? Hey, if the old routes are getting unreliable, why don't we just, build new ones? Well, it turns out the answer is a little more complicated. We're talking tens of billions of dollars, staggering environmental hurdles, and a geopolitical chess match for the entire 21st century. So, right now, on drawing boards around the world are some incredibly ambitious projects. You've got the gargantuan Chinese-backed Nicaragua Canal, which would be a direct rival to Panama. And then, over in Asia, you have two competing ideas for Thailand: the Kray Canal, something people have dreamed about for centuries, and a less disruptive idea called a land bridge. Basically, two giant ports on either coast connected by a super fast rail line.
And this table really breaks down the choice for a country like Thailand. And believe me, this isn't just about engineering. This is pure geopolitics. Just look at the trade-offs. If you build the full canal, you directly bypass the Malacca Strait, which really weakens U.S. leverage in the area. But it's a huge risk that could destroy Thailand's neutrality. The land bridge, on the other hand, is a much more subtle play. It doesn't totally bypass Malacca, but it still gets some of the same strategic benefits with a much, much lower risk of conflict.
And that right there brings us to the absolute core of this whole story. This race to build new canals isn't just about saving ships a few days of travel time. It's a global game, with the US and China as the main players to control the future flow of trade and energy. Now, to understand what's driving China, you have to know about this key idea, the Malacca Dilemma. What it means is that Beijing is keenly aware that its economic lifelines, we're talking its oil, its gas, its exports, all have to squeeze through the Malacca Strait. And that's a choke point, heavily influenced by the US Navy and its allies. So any disruption there could choke off its economy and grind its entire industrial engine to a halt. And the scale of this dilemma is just immense. This is not a small issue. I mean, look at these numbers. China relies on that one strait for about 75% of its oil imports. For a major ally like Japan, it's almost 90%. All told, about a third of all global trade passes through this one little waterway. That is just an astonishing concentration of risk in one spot. So let's play this out. If a project like the Kra Canal actually gets built, the ripple effects would be enormous. The US would lose a huge point of leverage. China basically solves its Malacca dilemma overnight. India suddenly has a much bigger Chinese naval presence right in its backyard. And a hub like Singapore, its entire economic model could be at risk. One canal could completely realign the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific. So where does this all leave us? Well, it's pretty clear we're moving out of a stable, predictable period and into something new, something much more competitive. We're entering what you might call the new choke point era. Look, if you take away one thing from all this, it should be this. The old model, the old map, dominated by Suez and Panama, is over. It's done. What we have now is a multipolar race where several global and regional powers are all competing to build, finance, and ultimately control the commercial arteries of the 21st century, which really leaves us with one final big question. For literally thousands of years, geography, where the mountains and rivers and seas are, has basically decided the rise and fall of empires. But now, in an age of planetary scale engineering and fierce geopolitical competition, can we just remake the map to fit our own ambitions? In the 21st century, will geography still be destiny?